The royal gardens of Kyloria were ablaze with sunlight, the fountains casting shimmering arcs across manicured lawns, the air perfumed with the scent of exotic blooms from across the kingdom. Yet the princess, Valera, paced along the marble walkway with a temper that no sunlight could soothe. Her golden hair caught the light, cascading in waves over her shoulders, but even the gleam of her jewels and the rustle of her silken gown could not mask the stubborn resolve in her eyes. She had been raised to be graceful, diplomatic, and compliant with the expectations of kings and kingdoms. Yet, in this moment, none of those lessons mattered. Before her stood a man she would never forget. He was a human, tall, lean, and sun-browned from travel, with a rugged charm that seemed almost casual, but radiated authority in a way that unsettled her. He had arrived weeks earlier, arriving at her court under the guise of an envoy, a mercenary offering aid and protection. But his presence had become far more than that, and now, in the golden light of the garden, he knelt before her with a simple offering of devotion. "My princess," he said, voice calm and steady, "I have traveled worlds and seas to stand here. I do not ask for riches. I do not ask for titles. I ask for you, your hand, your trust, your partnership." Valera's jaw tightened. She had expected diplomacy, politeness, perhaps even flattery, but not this directness. Humans, she had heard, were bold, reckless in their speech and action, and she had assumed that the stories were exaggerated. Now, standing before one in full measure of audacity, she realized they were not. "I will not marry you," she said finally, her voice clear and unwavering. "You are a foreigner. Your intentions may be noble, but my duty is to my people, not to your desires. Leave me be." The human did not flinch, did not beg, did not plead. He simply rose, brushing the dirt from his traveling coat, his eyes steady on hers. "Very well," he said quietly. "I expected as much, but know this, princess, I do not forget what is owed, and I do not abandon causes I deem just." Valera turned abruptly, spinning away from him, as though the sound of his voice might tether her thoughts. She walked the garden, her mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. He was infuriating, audacious, impossible to categorize, and yet there was a presence about him, a certainty, that both disturbed and fascinated her. She had rejected him, yes, but something in her chest twisted with anticipation she refused to name. The human did not linger. He bowed briefly, then left the garden without protest, his figure vanishing into the courtyard beyond, leaving a trail of whispered questions and unsettled courtiers in his wake. Valera stood in silence, staring after him, the certainty of her refusal battling with the undeniable impression he had left on her. Humans, she realized reluctantly, were dangerous in their unpredictability. They acted with intent that defied expectation, with courage that unsettled even the most disciplined of her people. Weeks passed. Valera immersed herself in courtly duties, overseeing alliances, trade negotiations, and the endless machinations of palace politics. Yet every decision, every conversation, every flicker of unrest in her kingdom seemed to echo with the memory of that human. Her advisors noted her distraction, though none could articulate the reason. She herself would not have admitted it. She would not have admitted anything that suggested vulnerability, but the truth was clear. The human had left an impression that would not fade, and she resented the strength of it. Meanwhile, across distant plains and in forests far from the capital, the human moved with purpose. He gathered information, assessed threats, and built a network of allies and mercenaries in silence. Where others saw borders and barriers, he saw opportunities, and where others hesitated, he acted. He was not motivated solely by affection, though it lingered like a quiet ember in his heart. He was motivated by principle, the desire to prove, through action, that he could stand for what was just, even when the world doubted him. Humans, as he had discovered countless times, had a remarkable capacity to leverage audacity into influence, and he intended to demonstrate that capacity now. Word of unrest in Kyloria reached his ears. Raiding parties from neighboring kingdoms, opportunistic warlords, and mercenary bands began to test the borders, probing defenses and spreading rumors of weakness. He knew, instinctively, that the princess would not seek his aid, not yet, but he could not stand idle. He moved to organize forces, allies who trusted him, not because of title or decree, but because of his competence, his audacity, and the quiet certainty with which he acted. In the royal palace, Valera continued her duties, unaware that forces were marshalling beyond the horizon. She had rejected the human, convinced that her own decisions were sufficient to protect her kingdom. And yet, even as her advisors debated strategies and analyzed intelligence reports, she could feel a subtle shift in the air's sense of unease that she could not name, a premonition that the balance of power was about to change. Humans, she knew in some distant part of her mind, had a way of arriving when least expected and leaving a mark that could not be ignored. The first sign came in whispers. Scouts reported movements along the northern plains, soldiers, organized, disciplined, yet unlike any forces Caloria had seen before. There were no banners, no identifying crests, just a precision, an efficiency, an almost unnatural coordination. Valera's council debated endlessly, attempting to assess whether this was an allied force, a mercenary guild, or the vanguard of some invasion. But she, recalling the human who had visited her weeks ago, felt a tightening in her chest, a sense she tried to suppress. It was him. She refused to admit it, not even to herself, yet the certainty was undeniable. The human, meanwhile, had moved with characteristic decisiveness. He had rallied forces not from obligation, but from loyalty earned through competence, audacity, and shared purpose. Peasants who had survived raids, ex-soldiers seeking purpose, and mercenaries motivated by respect rather than payment, all converged under his banner. By the time the first skirmishes reached the borders of he commanded an army of unmatched coordination, trained not through formal drills alone but through instinct, improvisation, and the sheer force of his leadership. Humans, he knew, excelled where others relied on procedure. They adapted, they survived, and when opportunity demanded, they could overwhelm expectation. Valera's first sight of the army struck her with disbelief. She had anticipated a modest force, enough perhaps to demonstrate loyalty or provide counsel. What she saw instead was a well-organized, disciplined, and overwhelming force, far larger and more capable than anything the kingdom had fielded. Soldiers moved in precise formations, commanders coordinated with rapid and fluid communication, and the human stood at the forefront, not in armor, not in ceremony, but with the undeniable presence of someone who commanded not by title, but by competence and audacity. Her advisors panicked. They argued, they debated, they sought to craft a narrative that could explain the impossible. A human, rejected, now approaching the capital with a force no kingdom could face. Valera, however, understood the truth. She had seen the audacity in his eyes weeks ago. She had witnessed the calm authority, the certainty that defied expectation. And now she understood that humans did not respect refusal, not in the way she had imagined. They acted, they returned, and they did so with consequences that could not be ignored. The first skirmishes at the city gates were swift. Raiders and opportunists testing the humans' army were routed effortlessly. Their cohesion shattered before they could even fully engage. His leadership was everywhere at once. He anticipated threats, countered attacks, and deployed forces with a precision that inspired awe. Soldiers under his command followed, not out of fear, but out of recognition of his capability. Humans, Valera realized in a flash of understanding, had a singular ability to turn audacity into effectiveness, unpredictability into advantage, and loyalty into an unstoppable force. Valera watched from the palace balcony, heart racing, as her kingdom faced the impossible, the arrival of the very human she had refused, accompanied by an army she could not defeat. Her pride, her training, and her sense of duty wrestled with an undeniable truth. She had underestimated him. She had assumed that a mercenary, a foreigner, could be refused, ignored, or dismissed. Now she realized that humans measured differently. They did not yield easily, they did not forget slights, and they could translate rejection into action with devastating effect. The human advanced steadily, deliberately, giving no sign of haste or aggression beyond the precision of his movements. His army maintained perfect coordination, responding instantly to unexpected threats, exploiting weaknesses in terrain and enemy formations, and demonstrating a level of efficiency that Caloria had never seen. Valera's advisors could only scramble, attempting to match strategy with numbers, yet they were consistently outmaneuvered. Humans, she realized, did not rely solely on power, they relied on adaptability, audacity, and the ability to leverage opportunity faster than any adversary could anticipate. The princess clenched her fists, realizing with a mix of frustration and awe that she had underestimated not just the man, but the nature of his people. Humans were extraordinary because they refused to accept limitations imposed by expectation, because they acted where others hesitated, and because their courage was amplified by ingenuity. And now, standing before the army she could not defeat, she understood a profound and terrifying truth. Rejecting a human was not the end of a matter. It was the beginning of consequences she could never have predicted. The first full day of engagement began before dawn. Mist clung to the plains outside Kyloria, curling around trees and rolling low over the hills, and in the half-light, the humans' army was already in motion. Valera watched from her balcony as scouts reported back with precision. Enemy patrols intercepted, supply lines disrupted, and forward positions secured without unnecessary loss. Every movement was deliberate, coordinated, and yet carried the subtle fluidity of improvisation. Humans, she realized, operated differently from her people. They thrived in situations where others would freeze, turned unpredictability into advantage, and acted decisively where hesitation would have been inevitable. The human did not lead from a throne or pavilion. He walked among his soldiers, not in ceremonial dress but in simple, functional gear, giving directions with quiet authority. His presence was magnetic, compelling attention without demanding it. Officers adjusted formations not because of his rank, but because they trusted his judgment. Humans, it seemed, had a way of inspiring loyalty without coercion, a trait alien in its subtlety and effectiveness. Valera felt a pang of unease. Her kingdom had relied on titles, rituals, and command chains, yet this human required none of them. His competence alone compelled obedience and coordination. Scouting reports began to flood in. Small bands of mercenaries and opportunistic raiders attempted to test the army's flanks, expecting to catch them off guard. The human, however, anticipated each move, countering with precision and speed that left enemy forces scattered and confused. Valera's advisors tried to follow his maneuvers on maps and projections, but the human did not operate on predictable patterns. He used terrain, timing, and psychological pressure to his advantage, exploiting every weakness in enemy assumptions. The battlefields became a web of calculated chaos, and yet his army moved through it with a coherence that defied the enemy's expectations. By midday, the human had positioned his forces in a series of overlapping defenses and feints, designed to draw the princess's elite guards into areas where advantage was maximal. He did not strike with blind force, he struck with foresight. Heavy units anchored choke points, cavalry exploited open spaces, and archers and ranged units disrupted enemy coordination. Every movement was synchronized to achieve maximum effect, with minimal loss. Valera could see, even from a distance, that her own army was reacting to him, rather than the reverse. They were trapped in a web he had woven, and they did not even realize it. The princess sent envoys to negotiate, hoping to stall or intimidate, but the human treated them with calm courtesy. "My purpose is not to destroy," he said, voice carrying easily across the courtyard where he met the delegation. "My purpose is to demonstrate consequence. You may choose resistance, but resistance carries cost. I do not ask for surrender, I offer only the inevitability of choice." Valera's envoys returned, pale-faced and uncertain. The human had impressed upon them a subtle, inescapable authority that could not be ignored. He did not wield magic, nor did he possess divine right. His power lay in clarity, decisiveness, and the ability to orchestrate forces faster than any enemy could adapt. Humans, she realized, had evolved differently from her people. Where others relied on hierarchy, humans relied on action. Where others measured risk and probability, humans measured it in opportunity and audacity. And where others might falter under uncertainty, humans thrived. The human's army continued its advance, not as a disorderly invasion, but as a precise instrument. Valera observed how he adapted in real time. When enemy archers attempted to disrupt supply lines, he dispatched light cavalry to flank and neutralize them. When raiders tried to infiltrate villages, rapid response teams intercepted and contained them before panic could spread. He coordinated communication across distances that her own commanders struggled to manage, maintaining situational awareness that was almost preternatural. His ability to adapt on the fly, to anticipate, and to act decisively defined every engagement. The first major confrontation occurred at the river Sil, a natural defensive barrier that the princess had assumed would halt any advancing army. The human surveyed the terrain with a measured gaze, calculating not just the strength of his forces, but the psychology of the defenders. He divided his troops into multiple contingents, some as decoys, some as reserves, and some to strike decisively at weak points. He moved like a strategist and a tactician simultaneously, blending audacity with calculated risk. Valera watched the battle unfold from the high cliffs above. The riverbank erupted with chaos as the princess's elite guards clashed with the humans' forces. Yet what seemed chaotic was orchestrated. The human had anticipated every reaction, every retreat, every push. Enemy formations were broken systematically, with minimal casualties on his side. Archers were caught in crossfire, infantry funneled into traps, and morale collapsed under pressure. By the end of the day, the riverbank was controlled, her forces retreating toward the capital in disarray. Her advisors were frantic. "We underestimated him," one cried. "He is a single man, yet his army is unmatched in coordination and efficiency." Another added, "He anticipates every move we make before we even commit to it." Valera, despite herself, felt a grudging admiration. This human had taken what she believed was impossible and made it routine. He did not rely on brute strength alone. He relied on adaptability, intuition, and audacity. The next days were a sequence of battles, each escalating in intensity. The human did not strike merely to win. He struck to demonstrate capability, to show that the princess's refusal had consequences, and to shape her perception as much as the battlefield. He moved with quiet authority, balancing aggression with restraint, ensuring that her kingdom could survive the confrontation without being destroyed outright. Humans, it seemed, understood the delicate calculus of survival and victory in ways that were alien yet. Brilliant Valera began to realize that her kingdom's traditional reliance on protocol and hierarchy was a weakness in the face of human audacity. Her advisors, trained for deliberation and procedure, struggled to respond to actions that were unpredictable yet precise. The human exploited this at every opportunity, turning hesitation into opportunity, confusion into advantage, and refusal into inevitability. The human's presence also reshaped the morale of her people. Villagers and soldiers alike began to recognize the inevitability of his movements. Fear transformed into cautious respect, panic into compliance with an order they had never received. Humans, Valera understood with growing clarity, had a remarkable capacity to inspire through action alone. Their courage was contagious, their decisiveness magnetic, and their ability to adapt in real time unparalleled. On the fifth day, the human positioned his forces near the capital gates, but he did not storm them immediately. Instead, he demonstrated control over the battlefield with subtle precision. Supply lines cut, communications disrupted, and morale undermined through visible demonstrations of efficiency and competence. His army, though not the largest in history, appeared unbeatable because it moved with purpose, coordination, and a sense of inevitability that unnerved defenders. Valera herself could not ignore the impact. She had rejected this man, underestimated him, and now she saw the consequences unfold with relentless clarity. Envoys once more approached, trembling under the weight of expectation. The human met them with calm, measured words. "I do not wish to destroy your city, princess," he said. "I do not seek your surrender through terror. I offer choice through consequence. You may resist, but understand the reality. Every action you take will meet a response you cannot anticipate, and yet one that will be precise and unavoidable." Valera listened from the balcony, her chest tightening. She had thought herself resolute, yet every word, every movement, every display of capability unsettled her. Humans did not simply act, they acted with purpose, clarity, and audacity. They turned hesitation into opportunity, and improbability into inevitability. And this human, audacious, relentless, and supremely competent, had proven it repeatedly. By the seventh day, the human had encircled the capital, in a combination of pressure and demonstration. He made no attempt to breach the gates without strategy. Instead, he created a situation in which any movement by the princess's forces could be anticipated and countered. Valera realized that this was not brute force, but mastery, a demonstration of audacity and human ingenuity that left no room for doubt, hesitation, or arrogance. Her city could not fall not because of his intent to destroy, but because of his ability to shape every possible outcome. Valera felt a mixture of fear, admiration, and grudging respect. She had refused him, believing that a single human could not impose consequences so vast. And yet, here he stood, commanding an army with efficiency, foresight, and audacity beyond anything she had ever imagined. Humans, she realized, had a unique capacity to translate will into action, courage into result, and refusal into inevitability. The human paused outside the capital gates as the sun set, his army forming a disciplined line that stretched beyond sight. He did not advance recklessly. He did not shout or issue threats. He waited, quiet, calm, and utterly composed, demonstrating not fear or arrogance, but the inevitability of human capability. Valera, observing from her tower, felt a shiver of understanding. She had underestimated him. She had underestimated humans, and she now understood the true measure of audacity, adaptability, and courage. For the first time, she wondered not if she had made a mistake in rejecting him, but what consequences that refusal would bring, and how she would respond when faced with the undeniable reality of his action. Humans, she realized fully, did not merely participate in events, they shaped them, and one human, rejected, had returned not with pleading, not with subterfuge, but with an army she could not defeat, and a strategy she could barely comprehend. The day began with the sky brushed in soft pink and gold, but the calm was deceiving. Beyond the city walls, the humans' army shifted with precision, each contingent positioned with intent and foresight. Scouts had returned with reports that Valera's forces had attempted minor maneuvers during the night, probing for weaknesses, but the human had anticipated them. His forces were already in positions to intercept, outflank, and neutralize any threat with minimal effort. Humans, he knew, thrived on initiative. Where others reacted slowly, humans acted decisively, exploiting every opportunity and turning indecision into advantage. Lyra observed the developments from the palace balcony, tension coiling in her chest. She had expected resistance, perhaps skirmishes at the borders, but the reality was far beyond what she had imagined. The human had not simply brought an army, he had orchestrated a display of coordination, adaptability, and audacity that surpassed anything her advisors had ever encountered. It was one thing to defeat raiders or skirmish parties. It was another to confront an opponent who anticipated, adapted, and directed forces with an almost uncanny precision. As dawn broke fully, the human began a series of deliberate maneuvers designed to demonstrate capability while minimizing unnecessary casualties. He split his forces into mobile units, some positioned to engage, others as reserves, and still others moving in patterns designed to pressure the city psychologically. From her vantage point, Valera could see the lines shifting, formations advancing and retreating, as though the army itself had a mind. And in a sense, it did, because the mind commanding it belonged to one human, audacious, relentless, and impossibly competent. The first clash came on the eastern outskirts, where a contingent of the city guard attempted to hold ground along a narrow valley. The human did not throw brute force at them. Instead, he used the terrain to his advantage. Archers were deployed on ridges to control sight lines. Light infantry flanked through concealed paths, and cavalry units struck rapidly at key positions to disrupt coordination. Valera watched in disbelief as her own forces, trained and disciplined, struggled to respond. They were reacting to him, not acting independently. Every move she thought would give them advantage was anticipated, countered, or turned against them. Reports came quickly from multiple sectors. Patrols had been ambushed, supply wagons redirected, and units caught in crossfire. Yet casualties on the human side were minimal. His strategy relied not on reckless slaughter, but on precision, adaptability, and psychological pressure. He understood the value of controlling perception as much as territory. Humans, Valera realized with growing unease, had a remarkable ability to turn chaos into advantage. Where others froze under uncertainty, humans acted. Where others hesitated in the face of risk, humans seized opportunity. And here, in plain view of the palace, one human had demonstrated it with devastating clarity. Valera's advisors urged her to negotiate, to seek terms, to attempt diplomacy. Yet she hesitated. Pride, duty, and stubbornness kept her silent. She had refused him once. To do so again would be to acknowledge her error. And yet, watching the unfolding battlefield, she could feel the inevitability of his actions pressing closer. Humans did not ask permission. They acted, they adapted, and they survived. One human, she understood now, could change the course of an entire kingdom through audacity and strategy alone. The human had positioned his forces to encircle key defensive positions without engaging them directly. He used feints and controlled retreats to lure Valera's commanders into traps, exploiting predictability and hesitation. Enemy formations broke before the first direct clash, morale faltering as soldiers realized they were being manipulated by a mind far faster and more precise than any they had encountered. Humans, she thought, were remarkable not because they were stronger or faster, but because they could see consequences before others could act, and then shape outcomes to their will. The second major engagement occurred near the northern bridge, where Valera's elite guard had hoped to hold a choke point. The human approached not with arrogance or brashness, but with calculated patience. He deployed ranged units to suppress key positions, used light infantry to probe for weak points, and timed cavalry strikes to coincide with distractions elsewhere. The battle was over before it truly began. Guards who had been confident in their strength were forced to retreat, units scattered by maneuvers they could not anticipate. Valera felt a growing respect mixed with fear. This human had not only outmaneuvered her army, he had rewritten the rules of engagement entirely. During the brief lull, the human approached the palace gates in a controlled display, sending envoys to speak with Valera directly. He did not demand surrender, nor did he issue threats. His words were calm, precise, and heavy with implication. "Princess Valida," he said, voice carrying clearly across the courtyard, "your choices are respected. My purpose is not destruction, but demonstration. You may resist, but understand that every action has consequence, and I act where others hesitate. I offer you the chance to decide, before necessity decides for you." Valera's heart pounded. She could not underestimate him again. His army was a force of efficiency, foresight, and audacity. His presence inspired loyalty and courage in a way her people could not match. Humans, she realized fully now, did not merely act, they reshaped events, influenced outcomes, and compelled others to respond. She understood, painfully, that rejection had consequences she could not control. The human's forces advanced slowly, deliberately, ensuring that every movement maintained control of the battlefield. He did not rush, nor did he allow opportunity to slip. He exploited terrain, misdirection, and psychological pressure to wear down the defenders without unnecessary loss. Every skirmish, every maneuver, was part of a larger plan designed to secure compliance without unnecessary bloodshed. Humans, Valera recognized, were efficient because they combined audacity with strategy, courage with calculation, and action with foresight. By afternoon, the human had established multiple zones of control around the capital. His army was neither chaotic nor rigid, it was fluid, adaptive, and terrifyingly competent. Enemy scouts reported movements that made no sense at first glance, only to discover later that they had been guided into positions advantageous to him. He was everywhere at once, directing contingents, adjusting strategy, and maintaining situational awareness across distances that would have overwhelmed any other commander. Humans, she realized, excelled in complexity, thrived under pressure, and leveraged audacity into decisive action. Valera's advisors were desperate, proposing hasty counterattacks, risky ambushes, and even negotiations, yet nothing could match the human's adaptability. Every action they took was anticipated and countered. The battlefield itself seemed to bend to his intent, as if his mind had extended into every movement, every formation, every decision. She could no longer doubt that humans possessed a unique capacity to translate audacity into results, and one human had demonstrated it in full measure. The third engagement, near the southern aqueducts, showcased his ingenuity further. Enemy forces attempted a coordinated push, aiming to split his army and exploit perceived weaknesses. He responded with simultaneous feints, rapid redeployment, and counterattacks that neutralized the threat. Units that had been confident moments before found themselves surrounded, misdirected, and forced into retreat. Casualties were minimal on his side. Effectiveness was maximal. Humans, she reflected, were not bound by conventional thought. They innovated in real time, improvised, and turned chaos into advantage. By evening, the human's presence was unmistakable throughout the capital region. His forces controlled access points, supply routes, and key positions, yet he had not attacked the city directly. Instead, he demonstrated control through efficiency, coordination, and the psychological impact of his audacity. Soldiers and citizens alike understood, without question, that resistance would meet an opponent capable of predicting, adapting, and executing flawlessly. Humans, she realized, wielded consequence as a weapon, and one human had wielded it with unmatched skill. Valera could not ignore the impact any longer. She had rejected him, assumed he was powerless to enforce consequences, and now faced the undeniable truth. Humans acted where others hesitated, adapted where others froze, and survived where others would fall. One human had returned not just with an army, but with the capacity to dictate outcomes entirely. Pride and stubbornness warred within her, but she understood that the battlefield now belonged to him. As night fell, the human consolidated his positions, ensuring control while preparing for the final stages of the campaign. He did not gloat, nor did he demand recognition. His calm presence radiated competence, inspiring confidence in his forces and unease in his opponents. Valera watched in silence, recognizing the futility of continued resistance. Humans did not merely participate, they shaped events, determined outcomes, and compelled response. And this human, the very one she had refused, had demonstrated that power completely. In the quiet of the palace, Valera reflected on what she had learned. She had underestimated him, underestimated humans, and underestimated the impact of audacity, combined with strategy. One human, acting decisively, had rendered her army ineffective without unnecessary destruction, had controlled the battlefield with precision, and had imposed consequences that could not be ignored. Pride, she realized, was meaningless in the face of capability, and hesitation was costly in the presence of action. As the stars emerged overhead, the human's army remained poised, disciplined, and prepared. He did not rest, did not celebrate, but simply continued to act with clarity, purpose, and foresight. Valera realized that she faced not just an army, but the embodiment of human ingenuity, courage, and adaptability. One human had returned after rejection, and he had brought a force she could not defeat, not through numbers alone, but through audacity, precision, and the power to act decisively. The lesson was unavoidable. Humans, she understood fully now, did not yield to expectation. They acted where others hesitated. They adapted where others faltered. They survived and they reshaped the world around them. And standing beyond the gates, commanding an army with quiet authority, one human had proven it beyond doubt. Dawn broke over Caloria with an almost surreal clarity. The streets of the city were quiet, as if the world itself held its breath. The human's army had established positions across the approaches, controlling every access point and vantage with precision, yet they did not move recklessly. Discipline and coordination radiated from every unit. Every soldier moved as if guided by a single mind. Valera, standing on her palace balcony, observed in awe and apprehension. She had refused this man, underestimated him, and now faced a reality she could neither ignore nor escape. Humans acted decisively, and one human could impose consequences greater than she had imagined. The morning reports confirmed her fears. Patrols had intercepted multiple attempts to regroup her forces, routing detachments that had been confident in their ability to resist. Supply convoys were cut off, communications disrupted, and morale faltering. Yet the human had accomplished all of this without direct assault on the city. His approach was methodical, adaptive, and deliberate. He understood the psychological dimension of warfare, knowing that demonstrating control without unnecessary bloodshed could achieve more than brute force alone. Humans, Valera realized with growing clarity, wielded initiative as power itself. The first encounter outside the city gates began with precision strikes. The humans sent forward light infantry to occupy high ground and anchor flanking positions. Archers and marksmen moved silently to positions that allowed them to strike key targets without overexposing themselves. Cavalry units conducted rapid feints, drawing defenders into traps where they could be neutralized without mass casualties. Valera watched as her elite guards, trained and disciplined, faltered under pressure. They were responding, not initiating. Every assumption they made was anticipated, countered, or exploited. The human was everywhere at once. His presence felt in every coordinated movement, every adaptive adjustment. By midday, the human had achieved psychological dominance. Her forces, though numerically significant, began to waver. The human did not need to win through sheer destruction. He won through audacity, planning, and the inevitability of consequence. Humans, Valera reflected, had a capacity to turn hesitation into failure and indecision into opportunity. One human, acting decisively, had disrupted the coordination, confidence, and cohesion of a kingdom's entire military apparatus. As the sun reached its zenith, the human advanced methodically, his army adapting to every maneuver Valera's commanders attempted. Where defenders attempted feints, they were drawn into controlled counters. Where they tried ambushes, they found themselves flanked or neutralized before engagement. The battlefield became a demonstration of human ingenuity, audacity combined with strategy, initiative reinforced with adaptability. By the afternoon, her forces were forced into defensive positions within the outer districts of the city. Casualties were minimal. Yet the message was unmistakable. Resistance was futile. Valera convened her council. Her advisors panicked and exhausted. "We cannot hold them," one cried. "Every move we make is anticipated, and their coordination is unlike anything we have faced." Another pleaded, "We must negotiate, or risk losing everything." Yet Valera understood that negotiation alone could not undo what had been set in motion. She had underestimated the human, she had rejected him, and now the consequences were inescapable. Humans did not merely participate in events, they shaped them. And one human had shaped this battle, this city, and her perception of possibility in ways she could barely comprehend. The human sent envoys once more, his approach calm, measured, and deliberate. "Princess Valida," he said, voice carrying clearly across the courtyard, "I do not seek destruction. I do not demand surrender through threat alone. I offer you choice through clarity. Resist, and face consequences I will enact with precision. Comply, and you preserve life, stability, and your people. The decision is yours, yet understand this inaction is not neutral. Humans act where others hesitate, and one human can turn indecision into outcome." Valera's chest tightened. She had assumed that refusal was safe, that rejecting a single man would carry no consequence. Now she realized the truth. Humans acted not for protocol, not for titles, but because they chose to. Their audacity transformed hesitation into opportunity. Their courage created action, and their ingenuity reshaped reality. And one human, standing outside her gates, had done precisely that. By late afternoon, the final engagement began. The human advanced in phases, controlling the approach routes, while simultaneously demonstrating the futility of resistance. His forces moved with uncanny coordination, anticipating every defensive maneuver and adjusting instantly. Units that had attempted to hold key positions were outmaneuvered, flanked, or rendered ineffective through tactical brilliance. Valera watched as her kingdom's military hierarchy struggled to adapt, outpaced by a single human's audacity and mastery of action. The battle itself became almost a spectacle. The human did not need to strike hard to win. His presence alone, his decisiveness, and the flawless execution of his army's maneuvers conveyed the inevitability of outcome. Valera saw the fear, confusion, and awe in her own people. They realized that they were facing more than an army. They were facing a mind capable of directing, adapting, and acting in ways that defied expectation. Humans, she understood fully now, were extraordinary because they translated courage into results, audacity into influence, and survival into action that reshaped events. In the heart of the city, Valera made her way to the gates, resolved to meet the human. She would not yield blindly, but she could not deny the evidence. His actions had demonstrated capability beyond her comprehension, control beyond her expectations, and audacity beyond her imagination. As she approached, she could see the soldiers holding formation, disciplined yet tense, aware that the human leading them had already changed the game entirely. He awaited her, calm, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Princess," he said simply, "you have faced the consequences of refusal. I have acted not out of vengeance, but because humans do not ignore what must be done. We act where others hesitate, and in acting, we ensure outcomes." Valera met his gaze, her pride battling recognition. She had underestimated him, underestimated humans, and underestimated the power of audacity, ingenuity, and courage. "You've proven everything," she admitted quietly. "I cannot defeat you. I cannot match the will, the precision, or the capability you have shown." The human inclined his head. "Then understand this. Resistance is not folly. Hesitation is not weakness. But action, decisiveness, and adaptability create reality. Humans survive, humans endure, and humans shape outcomes. One human can make the impossible inevitable." The realization struck Valera fully. She had rejected him, thinking a single human powerless. She had assumed that ceremony, protocol, and defense could protect her. And yet here he stood, unbowed, commanding respect and obedience not through title, not through threat, but through competence, decisiveness, and audacity. Humans, she understood, measured capability differently. They acted, they adapted, and they survived. Often against overwhelming odds, in the days that followed, the human's presence stabilized the city. He did not occupy, he did not subjugate. He guided, coordinated, and demonstrated the strength of initiative. Valera watched as he organized defenses, optimized supply lines, and ensured that her people could continue daily life without unnecessary suffering. Humans, she reflected, were extraordinary because they combined ingenuity, courage, and adaptability into a force that could be felt even without confrontation. One human had arrived, rejected, and returned with capability beyond imagination, reshaping not just a battle, but the very perception of what was possible. Valera finally understood that her refusal had been inconsequential in the face of such audacity. The human had acted decisively, demonstrating that capability and action were far more important than pride or protocol. Humans did not rely on ceremony. They relied on initiative. They did not wait for permission. They acted, and in acting, they transformed the world around them. By the final week, the city was secure, her forces reorganized under guidance, and the human's presence had become a stabilizing force. His army remained disciplined and ready, yet their threat was now a symbol of capability rather than aggression. Valera reflected on the journey. She had refused him, believed him powerless, and faced consequences she could not anticipate. Yet in that, she had witnessed the essence of humanity: audacity, adaptability, ingenuity, and courage combined to create change, enforce consequence, and inspire respect. In the quiet of the palace, Valera approached him. "You have changed everything," she said. "Not just the battle, not just the city, but the way we understand power, strategy, and action. Humans are extraordinary." He smiled faintly, calm yet intense. "We act where others hesitate. We adapt where others falter. We survive where others fail. One human, one decision, one action can change the course of events. You have seen it now. The choice is not just mine, but a reflection of what humans can accomplish when they refuse to be constrained by expectation." The stars appeared over Kailoria that night, silent witnesses to events that would shape the kingdom for generations. The human had returned after rejection, brought an army, demonstrated precision and ingenuity, and survived where others would have fallen. Valera knew, without doubt, that she had underestimated humans, and that she had learned a lesson in audacity, courage, and consequence that would endure far longer than memory of the battle. The city slept, safe under the shadow of disciplined forces guided by a human who had acted decisively. Valera, for the first time, felt a deep understanding of the power she had witnessed. Humans did not merely participate in events, they shaped them. One human had refused to accept impossibility, had acted decisively, and in doing so, had rewritten the terms of engagement for her kingdom. She had seen audacity, ingenuity, and courage combined into a force that could not be ignored. And standing there, across the courtyard, calm and unwavering, the human had proven the truth. Refusal did not diminish capability. Hesitation did not prevent action. And one human, acting decisively, could enforce outcomes, survive against expectation, and reshape the destiny of a kingdom. Humans were extraordinary, and one human had demonstrated it fully.